competitive Pokemon is no stranger to things being either over the top in terms of being broken or just being banned in general, whether that's justified or not. But what about among all of the banned Pokemon, which one of these actually stand out as the best in the game? In today's video, I want to rank every single Pokemon on the restricted list for VGC 2023 and see which some of these Pokemon might be really broken and which of these Pokemon might just suck. If you guys enjoy this and you want to see some more content like this, of course, like and subscribe for more, and make sure you guys check out Kurt down below, who also edited today's video. Without further ado, let's get started. So going over the tiers today, we have starting off with our S+ tier. These are going to be for the Pokemon that objectively speaking are really broken. When it comes to the restricteds, these are the ones that, in my opinion, deserve the ban if we are going off of strictly how good these Pokemon are, and they're so overwhelming that they make even other box arts or other restricted mythical Pokemon look weak in comparison. The S tiers are going to be for Pokemon that are still fairly meta defining, but they don't exactly make anything else truly unviable in the game for the most part. There might be an exception or two among this, which I can get into as case by case comes up, but overall these do a pretty good job at mostly just making sure that the metagame is fairly revolved around them without being the central piece in the format. They're still really good mons, just not the ones that break everything else or deem what's viable or not. A tiers are going to be for Pokemon that you'll still see on a good amount of teams, but these are typically in the common like 5th or 6th slots. Still fairly usable mons for sure, but they're not going to be the meta definers. B tiers are going to be for more niche things. This is where you can start to get into Pokemon that you don't necessarily need to bring dedicated counterplay to, but you just need to know how you're going to beat it. C tiers are going to be for more niche threats. These are typically things that will have a couple really good matchups into the S tiers and the S pluses, whether it's just against one or two of these threats, doesn't really matter. They're not really super viable, but they're good enough at checking something to where they could justify a unique team slot here and there. D tier is going to be for Pokemon that are really YouTuber picks. I'm going to throw these in thumbnails and you guys will see me saying they're broken, but they might not actually be. It's just that I'm lying to you. And the F tiers are going to be for Pokemon that are so bad in the format that even I couldn't really justify these. Starting off today's list though, we do have Mewtwo. Now Mewtwo is actually pretty interesting. I think that I've overhyped this mon in all honesty looking through other tier lists. A couple things that are in Mewtwo's favor, it's 130 speed, but at the same time, it's arguably really slow for this format. When we consider how much of the format is either revolving around Tailwind or Trick Room, 130 actually isn't that great of a speed tier. Despite the fact this could partner with really good Tailwind options, it doesn't have anything really great as a spread move to take advantage of it. And even in comparison to Pokemon like Fluttermane that not only outright beat Mewtwo typically, but also just have a better speed tier and also a better typing and even a good stab spread move, it's really hard to actually justify Mewtwo on a team. And even among other Psychic types, it's actually not even the fastest viable Psychic type. It doesn't have as good of a stab combination as other viable fast Psychic types, which again, you can kind of see where I'm getting at with this mon, but I'll get into it in a bit. So I think Mewtwo's honestly just kind of overshadowed. Normally, I think I typically have put this thing in the S tier when I've done other tier lists, but I'm actually going to put Mewtwo in the A tier today. That's not really the fact that I'm comparing against other box arts. It's actually just the fact that I think I've overhyped Mewtwo in previous formats. Keep in mind, by the way, that this tier list today is not going to be representative of in comparison to other restricteds. It's specifically going to be in comparison to the general Pokedex, where the box arts especially are going to have to deal with the fact that they're typically going to be most likely locked to a single slot or 2 slots per team. The Mythicals will be a different exception, because we actually have not had a format where Mythicals have ever been limited in usage. The only format that they've even been usable in VGC was in Series 13 and 14, where you could actually dedicate any amount of slots to these. So for Pokemon like Mew, which is our next example up, actually this is not going to be a factor against it. So we'll need to make sure to keep that in mind with its ranking. However, Mew still honestly is not that good. I think it would be one thing if Mew kept something like Expanding Force in its Pokedex, because it could actually kind of do well with a base 100 all-around stat spread and pretty unique coverage, but Mew again just kind of falls flat in comparison to everything else. It's not really that fast, it's not really that bulky. You need to kind of really pigeonhole Mew into very specific roles to even have a chance at doing well, and when this is going to be allowed, most likely it will be compared to other box art Pokemon, because Pokemon doesn't really discriminate against the Mythicals and the box arts really. If anything, the Mythicals just get thrown into the box art realm. Usually. There's never really the other way around. With that in mind, Mew honestly kind of sucks. I'm going to give Mew a D tier. I think really the only thing stopping it from being the F tier is because it's at least kind of usable. I mean, 100 all around with the pure psychic typing and synchronize is kind of decent. You can maybe make something like a Lumberry Dragonite set work, or even like a Terrafire set, and then go for like T-Wave and at least match speed control, which is kind of decent. But synchronize isn't really that great of an ability, but it's really, I think the best benefit you have is for T-Wave for matching speed tiers. That's really about it. Moving on to Kyogre. Fuck this mon. Moving on to Groudon. Fuck this mon. These two suck. I fucking hate these mons. I think, truthfully, the more that I've done any sort of generation competitive this format, the more I've realized that weather when these two Pokemon come will really be like genuinely, we're gonna actually probably get one of the most insane weather war formats we've probably ever had in terms of VGC. With Groudon and Kyogre especially, Groudon has finally gotten actually like genuinely viable partners outside of just Venusaur, to where this will actually be like a meta-defining playstyle to run a Sun team. Now, Weather's had some formats where it's been kind of good, especially in Generation 6 and 7, where like Mega Swampert was a fairly good option, and you would typically partner with mons like Zapdos or Mega Gengar and Gothitelle or other things of that nature. But this will be the first time like a really hard Sun team might genuinely be like a thing. I think overall, these two are going to be really good at checking each other. Weirdly enough, I think I'm even starting to get in the opinion that Groudon might even be the better option, which kind of feels like a hot take, but it's going to solely depend, I think, on other restricteds. Though due to the fact that Groudon can actually check Pokemon like Mirada pretty well, at least in theory, you can kind of check it well, specifically if you call Terra's right and you run like very tailored to beat Mirada on spreads. But you also have stuff like, for example, the fact that Groudon probably would take a little bit better of Common Tailwind partners right now. Though I will say that Torn Kyogre will be fucking gross. I don't really think that either of these Pokemon are better than each other, though. I think that Groudon might have a higher ceiling than Kyogre, because I think a lot more people are going to lean into Kyogre and it will get a lot more predictable. But I think that Groudon has a lot going for it. It's also a really good Zacian check. I think Groudon does a lot better of a job at checking other box arts, and it also happens to be a really good way around Kyogre because of the fact you're clearing its rain. But Kyogre is just such a brain dead mon that I think for now I'm going to settle a Kyogre higher. But my hot take is that honestly there might be a point in the format where Groudon ends up just being the objectively better option than Kyogre, which I think kind of lines up with what we've seen. Sun has been the objective best playstyle for Weather all format, and there hasn't really been a time besides Series 1 where Rain was better because of the lack of Paradox mons in Series 1. But yeah, I don't know. We're going to leave these two for now. Rayquaza. I think my opinion's changed on Rayquaza. Someone actually brought up to me the other day about Chien-Pao Rayquaza. Actually, it was my friend Griffin who built the Sandy Fox team. And it honestly kind of sparked a bit of a thought that Chien-Pao Rayquaza could actually be pretty decent. Now, I still think that honestly, we're probably better off with Dragonite in most cases, because Dragonite doesn't actually take a restricted spot, and also Dragonite has a lot more versatility, its abilities being a little bit more useful than Rays. But I'd be lying if I said that I think that Rayquaza will actually be a bad Pokemon. I think Rayquaza definitely deserves an A tier. I think it's a solid threat overall. Stuff like Terra Normal, E-Speed will objectively be really hard to counter, and this thing could definitely run a really good mixed spread, and it would run that a lot more viably than Dragonite would, for example. The speed is overall higher, which is great. At 95, it's like a whole 15 base higher, which means you could tie mons like Arcanine, you could outpace stuff like Land of T, which is really huge. On top of that as well, your offenses are better in both camps, but this thing is also a lot more of a glass cannon than Dragonite is, and it's a lot more susceptible to priority. For example, Rayquaza would obviously also on this bandit set not be able to just run inner focus and avoid fake out. You would have to just take the flinch at that point, which is definitely a huge mark against Rayquaza on that sort of comp. Also, you'd have to get intimidated around, which is kind of bad for it. You have no multi-scale, which is kind of bad for like the Orthworm comps. So I do think that there's a lot of benefit to still running Dragonite over this. But I'd be lying if I said that I think Rayquaza is outright unviable or even like a niche pick. I think it's going to be deadly enough. And the damage output on some teams might just be the thing that justifies it. It's going to be an A tier. I still think Dragonite will be a little bit better though. Moving on to Dialga. Dialga is going to be an S tier. I think Dialga's good. I think Dialga Origin, actually, I'm going even lower on it than I did in my Seal tier list. I think this is a D tier for sure. The biggest things here are that Dialga base has item freeness. Also the fact that with Terra this gen, you could honestly probably, I think that one of the things I'm looking most forward to is probably either Terra Fire or Poison Dialga being really good, or even Steel, all of which could be really good. I think Poison especially might be the Terra type of choice because it makes you into an actual fairy resistance, which is cool, but you also get a really good fighting check out of this, which is great for your weakness to fighting at the very least, which is huge. Overall, Dialga's still going to be a really good Trick setter. I think there's going to be a lot of room to grow with this mon as well, especially without any room from mons like Duskmane or Solgaleo being in this format. I think Dialga might have some merit here. Overall, gonna be a solid S tier. Meanwhile, Dialga Origin sucks. This thing is item locked. I'm actually gonna put it even lower than Mew, to be honest. I think the item lock in this thing really hurts it, and the 20 base higher SPDF doesn't really matter when Dialga can very viably run an Assault Vest and be good. So yeah, Dialga Origin just kind of sucks. Palkia, I think I'm gonna give this form the S tier, and I think I'm gonna give the Origin form actually an A tier. I'm going to put it at least above Mewtwo, though. The biggest reason is the fact that under Tailwind, this can at least be a really good check to other dragons. However, I still actually believe that this will be really viable on spreads like Assault Vest or even like a Citrus set with a really bulky Trick Room build, specifically as a way to try and pressure the other Groudon and Kyogre cores. And I think these really bulky spreads are why Kyogre ends up being a little bit less used whenever Palkia surges up anyway. And I think there's enough viable partners for Palkia to actually be a viable pick in this format. Origin's still going to be really threatening, and I think that speed tier will actually make a huge difference on some teams. But at the same time, though, I'd be lying if I said that I thought that Palkia Origin would actually be a really good metagame threat other than just checking other dragons, because of the fact that I think that, again, similar to Mewtwo, that 120 speed is actually really slow in this format, considering the fact that mons like Booster Fluttermane and Booster Moon can just outright outpace you with very little effort, and especially in Moon's case, it can Tailwind on you as well, which is kind of terrifying. So yeah, honestly, Palkia Origin's kind of like just a solid A tier. Palkia regular, though, I think is a really good S tier. Moving into Giratina forms, this is the one where I think the Origin form is actually better. I think I mentioned this in the Ghost tier list, I want to say. There was some sort of tier list I did recently, though, where I actually think that this mon with Terra Steel could be pretty decent as a bulky Tailwind setter, because it does still get Tailwind, thankfully. I think that as well with sets like Draco, for example, with like a Willow Hex and then Tailwind could actually probably be the metagame staple for this mon, if I had to guess. And I use that very loosely, though with Terra Steel, this could actually be a really annoying check for most dragons, as well as like most fairies. And it's going to be kind of an annoying mon to kill overall. I think the Giratina base, meanwhile, will still be a good pressure machine, but I use good in the sense of like compared to other Pokemon, not necessarily compared to other restricteds. Neither really should deserve a restricted slot, but if you're going to use either, I think the Giratina Origin at least might have some actual merit. It's going to probably just perform like really good bulky roles, similar to how Hydreigon did in Series 1, and that's going to be about it. Overall, B tier and C tier respectively. Arceus forms. So we have a bit of a rapid fire around here. So in terms of the S plus Arceus forms, we have Arceus Normal, which gets to the very top of the metagame. This will be a really good just E-Speed sponge, and with stuff like Terra Ghost, she could be really good overall with Terra Blast. Getting a no drawback option, though Phantom Force is still really good on this mon. We have Terra Fighting, which can get an S tier. We have Terra Flying, which can get an S tier. We have Terra Psychic, which can get actually, so I can't lie, all the Arceus forms are gonna at least get like the S tier besides Bug, which I'll start with Bug right now, like it's an A tier. Bug's typing is just so bad you can't even really make like a good Terra around it, in my opinion. Everything else has enough merit though to where we can actually make this work. So we have, let's see, so this should be Terra Ground. Terra Ground gets an S+, but I think it's a little worse than Groudon. This is some nice special benefit though. These three are just kind of just average. They have good typing. Most of the Arceus honestly are not going to get mentions unless they're S+s or A tier, because most of them just do enough of a job. Unless it's the type I really think that has to be justified. Next up, we'll actually go into the weather forms for Arceus, the Rock and the Ice, respectively. These both benefit from different weathers. The Spidef from Sand and Edgequake sets could be really good on this, especially if you need that Spidef boost. This one can get a nice boost from Hail, and I think especially that Fizz boost with Calm Mind will be huge. Terra Ghost will probably be the second best Arceus form in all honesty. I think that Terra Steel will be really good. I think this one will at least be below Groudon Kyogre level, probably the best one that's below them. We have Fire, which is just okay. I guess it's actually a lot better of a defensive typing. VGC will give it S. Water, this could be a decent Kyogre check, like a check in the loosest sense, but it could be kind of decent as a defensive sponge. Grass, this one at least gets around Spore, which is kind of cool, so it gets above Fighting. This one's Electric. This one's pretty low, but at least Bolt Beam coverage, so we'll give it above Fighting. I just realized I put Flying really low too. This one can at least get below Electric. We're gonna, let's see, so, oh, this one's actually Psychic, and this one's Poison. Poison can still actually say that low. Poison doesn't really matter, but Psychic can get like right above that. Terra Dragon, not Terra Dragon, Arceus Dragon can get, honestly, Arceus Dragon's not that great in VGC, I feel like. We'll give this thing right above Fighting at the very least. I think it's a little bit better into other Dragon box arts, if nothing else. Dark Arceus, Dark isn't really that great right now. There's not really a lot of top tier Psychics or Ghost types in general. Though I will say that this, actually, I take that back. This one can get an S+ tier at the bottom of the tier, solely for the fact this could actually be a decent Cali check. That's really about it. And then Arceus Fairy gets an S tier, well, an S+ tier. This can get right above Water. Again, really good Dragon check, which is huge because a lot of these restricted mons are Dragon typing, which is really good. So that's our Arceus speedrun. Hopefully you guys learned something from that. But basically, most of these Arceus are Calm Mind mons, if not Edgequake mons, with SD or just general like physical sets with like E-Speed, Terra Normal, etc. They're not really going to be defensively invested besides maybe like Fairy Seal and Water, which is about it. Actually, Dark might be as well just for the Cali matchup. But yeah, that's really it for the Arceus forms. Moving on, we have Meloetta. Meloetta's interesting. I actually think this thing can get a D tier. I think that the biggest benefit will be the non-Pirouette form. I think Pirouette form is actually going to be pretty garbage. But overall, this thing can be a pretty decent AV sponge. Realistically, though, the only time you're going to use it is for Relic Song spamming, which means you kind of need to summon this form, but then just go right back to the base. And it's just going to be kind of a good sleep machine with the sound-based move that can get through sub. That's really the best benefit you have with Meloetta. DNC will actually be pretty cool with Terra. I'm going to give this like a B tier. This thing could be a pretty decent option with like Terra Fire, Terra Flying, Terra Grass, etc. Really just something that will help with resistances, but I think the biggest Terra option will be Terra Water. Terra Water or Grass I think will be huge in this thing, and it'll be an okay Trick Room mon with stuff like Diamond Storm being a good spread on Trick Room. You have some good support overall from this mon. I believe DNC does get Helping Hand, if I remember correctly. Let me actually double check that. I know you get like the dual screens at the very least, which is huge on Trick Room. You can get like Encore, for example, which is decent. Fake Tears could be cool. Guard Split could be cool. Yep, you do get Helping Hand. You get multiple weathers. The only one you get all 4 weathers, skill swap, etc. So you have enough stuff going for you. This could be a decent option in my opinion. Solid B tier. Volcanion's interesting. I think Volcanion's actually going to be a solid A tier mon. It's going to be at least better than Arceus Bug. I'm even inclined to put it above Rayquaza and Mewtwo for the fact this doesn't cost a restricted slot most likely, which is actually a pretty big deal for Volcanion, assuming that Series 13 mechanics where the mythicals just can be thrown on a team whenever that format drops will be implemented, because that's actually kind of huge. But at the same time, though, I don't know. I feel like Volcanion has enough going for it. This is a really good check to Rain and Sun at the very least. With the Water and Fire typing, you get a lot of cool resistances to stuff like Grass, for example. Well, Grass is neutral. But you get a lot of cool resistances to stuff like Water, which you also have an immunity to, which is pretty nice. Yeah, I'm going to at least put this above Ray and Mewtwo. If nothing else, Mewtwo, I'm also going to actually put Mewtwo below Ray. I can't lie. Ray just out damaging and having that really good priority is pretty big. But if nothing else, the role is a lot more unique with Volcano and pretty hard to justify outside of things compared to Rayquaza, which at least has a lot of competition with Dragonite. And Mewtwo, it just has a lot of competition with other box arts, and it's just in general like kind of lackluster compared to the box art pool. At least with Ray's case, it's just compared to a non-box art, which I think has some merit to it, to be fair, because at the very bare minimum, your stats are a lot better offensively. Mewtwo is just a lot weaker than other box arts, which kind of sucks. It's just power creep really doing it dirty. So yeah, Hoopa base is gonna get a C tier. I'm gonna put this thing at the top of C tier just because of the fact that you're not locked into that terrible typing anymore. And with Terra, this could be a decent Trick Room setter with like a room service build, and I'm curious to see if that will pop off. Hoopa Unbound I've actually become a lot higher on the more that I've thought about how good this thing will be with Terra. Because one of the worst things for it, well, one of the worst things for it was the fact that it was only usable in singles previously, which sucked because it's a U-turn heavy format. But with Terra, this thing could actually be a really good option with stuff like Terra Fighting, Terra Steel, really just any sort of good Terra typing that will help with offensive weaknesses that this thing currently has. I think Fighting especially will be big. I think Koopa could be a decent option on Tailwind with like a Scarf set, similar to how Great Tusk typically runs Scarf on Tailwind. And also Hyperspace Fairy Breaking Through Protect will be huge as a no drawback 100 base power dark move. I think Koopa Unbound honestly can get an A tier. I'm going to put this thing, if nothing else, at least above Arceus Bug. I think it's weak enough to where this thing is weaker than mons like Mewtwo, Ray, and Volcanion at least, but it's definitely better than Arceus Bug in terms of viability here. Magearna gets an S+, and I would argue Magearna would only be eclipsed by Arceus Normal. Actually, and Ghost. Because Ghost can just go the Terra Normal route and gain the stab. These two really just run the opposite Terra type of each other. This one runs Terra Ghost, this one runs Terra Normal. This one can still run Terra Normal, though, and this one can still run Terra Ghost, but they're probably just running the opposite version stab. Magearna can get a solid third, though. This will be a really cool Trick Room mon, and I think overall this will be a great snowball next to mons like Ursaluna. And I think realistically, this will actually be the mon that I think makes Trick Room broken this format. Now, it's not to say that Ursaluna hasn't done a good job at that already, but to be fair, Ursaluna I think is enough of a one-trick pony to where this can kind of work. But with a really broken offensive Trick Room setter that can apply enough pressure, because we currently do actually lack a really good Trick Room setter that can apply such offensive pressure, the best case I could think of would be either just like Fluttermane and Meowscarada, which even still Meowscarada is not that great at it right now, or maybe a mon like, for example, Hatterene is a pretty good example, and Hatterene's probably truthfully the best case of this, where you have an offensive Trick Room setter that can deal some good damage, but Magearna would just outright invalidate any other Trick Room mon, I think, besides maybe Cresselia, because Cresselia is just really fucking dumb support-wise. But overall, I think Mag could be a really good snowball for teams. It's one of those things that puts your opponent on a really good timer, because once you claim any KO with either Pokemon, even if Magearna didn't kill it, you officially have gotten to the point where it's nearly too late, unless your opponent has gotten off a significant amount of damage on Magearna. So I do think this thing is going to be so centralizing for Trick Room that it will deserve that S+, especially with Terra. That thing will be filthy. Moving into Zacian, I think Zacian and Zacian Crown are pretty interesting. Zacian Crown, I'm actually going to put right below Groudon, Kyogre, Magearna. The fact this thing can no longer actually lead as viably as it can and switch out and gain back the boost kind of sucks. Especially in such an Intimidate heavy meta with mons like Arcanine and Landorus T being at some of the best levels they've ever been. Well, not in Landorus' case, but Arcanine definitely. In one of the best levels it's been in a while. Landorus is still really good though, and it will still be a great check to Zacian. And also whenever Incineroar eventually comes back, we all know it's going to be an amazing check to this mon as well. I think that a couple things that are out of Zacian's favor though, again, that lead ability kind of sucks, but also Terra helps a lot with finding actual checks to Zacian, because really most of the actual viable checks to Zacian in previous games were really just other restricted steel types. However, with a lot of the Terra options now being able to Terra into stuff like water and steel very viably with heavy Phys-Def mons, we could maybe see like a really good check with Helmet Landorus, for example, pop up in the metagame. And I think that kind of hurts Zacian actually, especially when it can no longer just commit on lead to a game. You now need to kind of force this thing to be a cleaner, which it's still an incredible cleaner, but I think that Zacian's overall going to be a lot more predictable, especially when Behemoth Blade no longer is as useful as it was, because it typically was really good into Dynamax mons. So I don't actually think Zacian's even going to be a top 5 mon anymore, as weird as that sounds, at least among the restricted pool. Now Zacian's still going to be incredible. I think it's still going to be one of the best Pokemon to use, and it will still be very brain dead. However, especially when we include mythicals, I actually fail to see this thing being a top 5 mon anymore. Let me know if you guys think that down below as well. I'm kind of curious to see how other people view Zacian right now, because I do not think it's actually going to be like as meta defining or even close to as meta defining as it was. Overall, still an S+ for sure. Zacian base, I'm going to give this thing the bottom of the S+. I think this might actually have some merit with stuff like Clear Amulet sets being really good. And that's really the one area where I actually think this thing deserves the S+, is that Clear Amulet might unironically be kind of viable in spawn with like a Terra Steel set to try and still boost the coverage and gain some good defensive matchups into mons like opposing Zacian. I don't want to say this will be suddenly some amazing Pokemon, but I think that if nothing else, Clear Amulet does give this thing an actual viable place with the nerf to Intrepid Sword. So I'll give this thing an S+. Moving on, we do have the Zamzenta forms. I'm gonna give Zamzenta base a B tier. I don't think this one's that good, but it's at least a little more viable. Well, actually, no, this is definitely less viable than Giratina, I would argue. This thing could be a decent Scarf option. When coaching comes back and it becomes a thing, I think both Zamzentas go up in viability, but for now, this one gets a B tier. Zamzenta Crowned, though, can get at least an A tier. This thing definitely is at least more viable than Mewtwo. It's still a really good option overall, and I think the body press will help this form especially a lot. And with stuff like Terra Water, you could make this thing to a really good support mon overall. But again, coaching was a really big thing for Zama. It gave a lot of use to this thing in VGC, in my opinion. Though for some other really good support options on this thing, you do have moves like Helping Hand and Wide Guard, which are decent. And with stuff like Helping Hand, Wide Guard, Iron Defense, and Body Press, you could actually make this thing to a decent sponge. It's definitely still, in my opinion, a bit lackluster, because you mostly will probably need to dedicate a Terra type due to the fact this is a Steel type, which is really weak to a lot of common moves like Earthquake and Headlong. And I think a lot of viable Pokemon will kind of crumble to this. Actually, no, I just realized you don't need to run Behemoth Bash, because Blood Rain will still be a fucking impressive piece of shit mon. Yeah, this thing now has a little bit of forward move syndrome, if anything, but it's still gonna be really good. Solid A tier. Eternatus. Eternatus will be pretty decent in my opinion. I think Etern will actually have some viability for a few things. For one, this is a really good lead into Dozagiri teams with stuff, for example, like T-Spikes actually being kind of viable in this mon as a move slot with like T-Spikes, Vanish Shock, Protect, and then like Mystical Fire or something, or even like Draco. This thing could be a pretty decent offensive piece overall with that in mind. It's really fast, typing is really good offensively for itself, and you can maybe tear this thing into like a Terra Grass to really solidify that you're checking Dozo. However, I think one of the worst things for this is the loss of Meteor Beam. Meteor Beam was such a good option on Eternatus because it actually gave you a fairly unique item you could run, being the Power Herb, and it also was a really good way to start snowballing teams like Cosmic Power, Meteor Beam, and then Filler. So I do think that Eternatus actually lost a lot of potential to be viable, despite the fact that I think this format favors a mon like Eternatus a little bit better. So I'm going to actually give Etern an A tier. I think it's at least better than mons like Mewtwo and Zama. But it's, sadly, I think Etern, also the speed tier being pretty slow for this format. Again, 130 is no longer fast. So we'll give this thing just an A tier. It's a fine mon. I think when Meteor Beam comes back, this will become an S tier, but for now it's not. Fuck Calyrex, the worst Pokemon. It's the only restricted actually that gains an F tier in my opinion. Now you have Calyrex's forms, the actual good ones. Cali base, I think I'm actually going to give a S plus to. I think this is, if nothing else, at least better than Zamzan Base, but I'd be lying if I said I thought it was better than most Arceus types. I think that this will be a monster with Terra, honestly, and I think that it will overall be a really strong offensive piece. It's going to be a great option with Terra Water, for example. You definitely want to lean to the defensive Terras on this thing to try and pop Policy with like a partner slot. Terra Fire could also be amazing with like a partner Aqua Jet user that's like really weak. Specifically Mons, like, I'm trying to think of really weak Aqua Jet users, because I know there's a lot of them. Like, Dragonite. Dragonite would be an amazing partner with this, actually. Specifically, like an Aqua Jet Dragonite, or maybe, like, Bruxish, for example, with, like, Aqua Jet, and then Dazzling could be pretty decent to stop priority under your Trick Room. Point being is that you would definitely try and pop this thing with some sort of priority option with, like, a Aqua Jet, or, like, a really weak other move with, like, a Terra Fire build, and then just start steamrolling teams with Tantrum, Glacial Lance, and then fillers, because Glacial Lance is a really good spread option that's, like, no drawback, besides the nerf to its damage that it got that doesn't actually fucking matter. It's still easy S+ for sure. Cali Shadow, I think among the actual Pokemon that are returning to these games, Cali Shadow is probably the second best. I still think Magearna is a little bit better for this format because of the fact we've gotten such a good Trick Room format down. But Cali Shadow, I'd be lying if I said it was at least not as good as Magearna. Actually, no, I think Cali Shadow is a little bit better than Magearna. The biggest reason for this is I think the fact the ability to ignore berries while also being able to, not that berries are really huge, but especially stuff like citrus berries really big in VGC to just try and avoid actually being a 3-hit KO into certain Pokemon. This is really huge in a lot of matchups like Incineroar forcing to run AV in Generation 8 because you couldn't just run a citrus berry to try and 3-hit KO that way. But also Terra will be so filthy in this mon. Calyrex might actually probably be the best Terra mon of the game. I don't think the two Arceus forms that are higher really need Terra as much, but they really do obviously have a lot of benefit with that in certain matchups, with just that 50-50, similar to how like the Mouse-Ape core has a lot of 50-50 with that. This core will be pretty similar with these two Arceus forms overall, just having a lot of mind games with that. But Cali Shadow I think will objectively probably be like the best Terra mon of the game, specifically in terms of the highest ceiling. However, I do think that really just the lack of priority that kind of hurts this thing. 150 is actually kind of fast. This thing can at least force mons that are not boost energy to have to respect it, which is pretty big at the very least because a lot of teams will typically run multiple paradoxes. Though I will say in a restricted format where mons like Mirada and Groudon are in the game, the boost energy will be a lot less necessary, which will at the very least hurt a little bit of viability here. Overall, Cali Shadow is still really good, but honestly, this thing is probably like not exactly a top 3 mon, and I'll get into that in a bit. There's actually a couple Pokemon I think will be a little bit better than this. Moving on, we do have Zarude. Now, Zarude is going to get a C tier. I think this thing is kind of fine. Jungle Healing is a cool move. Realistically, though, it's just shitty Cress. It's Cress without Trick Room, which kind of sucks for it, but it is what it is. There's not a lot to say about this thing. It would probably be a B tier if it kept Darkest Lariat, because at least that could actually be a decent check Dozo, but because of the fact that you don't have Darkest Lariat, you're kind of screwed. D tier mon for sure. Well, C tier mon for sure. Walking Wake. Now, this is probably going to be one of the hottest takes you will take away from this entire video. My opinion on Walking Wake has changed a lot. I think realistically though, Walking Wake might unironically be one of the best Pokemon in the game. Specifically, there's a few reasons for this. For one, similarly to mons like Magearna, we don't actually have anything proving this will be a restricted slot, specifically in the sense of like the box art like Groudon, Mirada, where you can only run 1 or 2 on a team depending on the format. We have nothing to prove that yet for this Pokemon, so technically speaking right now, this thing's kind of an enigma. Now, I think this will actually be treated similar to the Mythicals, and I think there's reason to prove that, such as the fact this was released through a raid event, and it's the only release we've had for this Pokemon so far. So unless this thing gets added to a DLC Pokedex, I do actually firmly believe that this will be treated like the Mythicals, where this will just be flat out allowed on teams, which I think already gives this thing so much merit. I would at bare minimum put this thing above like Kyogre Groudon. I would even consider, no, I'm going to put it right below Magearna. I think Magearna is still a little bit more friendly with Terra, and I think this will be an absolute monster in the games. But I do actually think that Walking Wake, because of the fact it's not going to be forced to be a restricted Pokemon in the sense of being limited to team comps, will actually be like a top 5 mon in this game. Well, actually, no, it's going to be an honorable mention. There's one Pokemon I think will be better. And I think that'll be the one option that I think will be better than even Calyrex, but I'll get into that in a bit. Overall, though, really disgusting mon, easy S+. Moving on to Iron Leaves. Iron Leaves will be decent. I think this will definitely be a solid B tier mon. Iron Leaves with Terra will actually be kind of cool. I think it's probably going to be better than DNC, actually. This is borderline an A tier. I think one of the biggest things out of this thing's favor is how reliant it is on Terra due to the fact that it's such a shitty typing of Grass Psychic. But Terra fighting on this is actually really free, and with moves like Sacred Sword getting around Dozo, this is actually a really good check with like a Scope Lens with like Sacred Sword, Leaf Blade filler, because you can get around most Dozo Terra types with that, and then Side Blade taking advantage of terrain, whether Psychic or Electric, is actually pretty good, because trade mind games will be huge when Mirada enters the field. Overall, really solid mon. I think this will be a pretty cool one, just it's going to be overshadowed by so many other things, sadly. And it's really just the fact that compared to other mons competing with the boost energy, this will kind of hurt. But Scope Lens is still so good on this mon, so we'll give it B. Next up is Groudon. Now, I think Groudon is actually going to be right below Zacian in terms of viability. Zacian really is just going to be the kind of thing that hurts this thing overall with usage because of the fact that Groudon, sadly, it's just too slow. 135 speed actually is kind of slow for this format. However, with like a Terra Fire, you could actually make this thing to an absolute monster, offensively speaking. And I do think this will be a really good cleaner, and Groudon will opt to run more defensive roles because of Groudon existing, because it's just a lot better of an offensive mon in terms of a Sunsetter. But Groudon has a lot going for it, in my opinion. I think, for one, the fact that this thing actually naturally does resist Kyogre's stab, which is already a huge benefit for Sun, because Groudon would have to take super effective damage still, which is kind of an L. But with Groudon's case, though, you're actually a fairly good resistance with 2 times resistance due to your Dragon typing. You also do have Collision Course, which deals more damage if it's super effective, which is nice, especially with a lot of Terra Steel mons being a thing, or even like Terra Dark options being kind of a thing, or just for things like the Ruin Quartet and all that. So there's a lot of good mons that this move could be really useful for. I think one of the best benefits, though, will be like a Sword Stance Flame Charge set will probably be like the highest ceiling this thing can get, because it will be a really good way around opposing Tailwind teams, or maybe things with like Iron Bundle, for example. So I do think a Groudon will have a place. I just think that these mons all will be more consistent than it is all. Finally, Mirada, and I've already spoiled, but this will actually probably be like one of the best mons in the game. Now, I will say, I'm still interested to see if Arceus forms will be a little bit better than this. I'm putting the Arceuses above purely because of the fact they're not going to have a metagame where they're really restricted team slot wise. And on top of it as well, I think they're going to be a little bit better Terra options. And with Terra, I think they'll become a little bit unreasonable for these 2 forms in particular. However, I still think that Mirada will be really dumb. I think it's going to be one of those things where, truthfully, I could actually, never mind, I take that back. Because Mirada actually is something that these 2 forms do kind of lack. And it's in terms of the fact that they're viable options. And I'm actually going to put Kali above for the same reason. It's because of the fact that both of these have really strong, really spammable spread moves. In Miradon's case, it's going to be Discharge, which, albeit a little bit less viable than stuff like, for example, the Wild Storm that Thundurus has, but honestly still really good. And especially with the Electric Train you're setting, you can partner this with like a Groudon or another Terra Groundmon and just snowball teams. Calyrex in particular, though, has Astral Barrage, which I think will be a lot more no drawback. And especially with like a Terra Fighting set, you're going to basically be unwallable. Now, the reason that Mirada will get higher than Calyrex today is purely for the fact that this thing will be able to, if nothing else, partner with a lot of better Pokemon and get a lot higher net ceiling out of this. Now, what do I mean? For example, I can throw on a Focus Sash bundle next to Miradon, still keep my terrain very freely unless my opponent has a way of clearing terrain, and on top of that as well, still get the booster energy on Bundle while still keeping a Focus Sash intact. It essentially gives Bundle a second item for free just by this Pokemon existing, at least as long as terrain exists. So I do think that with that in mind, that Miradon alone, just getting a really good form of speed control next to Monsic Bundle, for example, will be really huge for it. However, the nerf the negative side of this is it does benefit the opponent too. But I do think that Miradon will have such a high ceiling. Everything in the format will revolve around how to beat Miradon, in my opinion. This thing will partner really well with mons like Kali Shadow, Zacian Crown, Groudon, etc. Really, I think every restricted mon in this S+ tier, besides Kali Ice, this will be a really good partner for. I think even like Groudon, really everything here. Maybe not Magearna as well. I think it's really just the Trick Room core, but Magearna Kali will probably be like one of the best Trick Room cores you can go. And even still, Mirada might not be bad on that either. But overall, it's one of those things where it actually has like no drawback really being ran. Miradon's probably like the best mon in the game, I would argue. Really, I think the only contest for this might be Kali Shadow. I think they're going to both be pretty good. And realistically, it's going to depend. I think Kali Shadow will be huge though in terms of being a nice option to beat the Miradon teams, because you'll partner this thing with mons like Indeedee as well to clear terrain and as like a backseater, and that could actually be really terrifying too, because then not only do you gain a priority immediately, which is huge, but you also then proceed to clear Miradon's terrain, which weakens its damage, as well as the fact that you weaken its Electro Stab ability. You can clear a lot of random Quark tries with this. You could do a lot of things with that core, so I think this will be interesting. Actually, I'm curious to see which mon will be better. But let me know what your guys' thoughts are down below. If you enjoy this, you want to see some more content like it, of course, like and subscribe for more. Make sure you guys consider becoming channel members today, where for just a couple dollars a month, you can become a channel member and gain access to bonus content through a couple videos every month, as well as the fact that you can get some general, I don't know, it's just extra content and you get some free emotes. Our members currently are going to be Zeke, Mia, Bibat, Timo Mueller, Sam, Bambambi, Rao Plays, Obo, Johannes B, and Del, aka to Double. Make sure, of course, you guys click that button down below if you want to get some extra content. It helps go a long way with supporting Kurt and paying my editor, of course, who is Kurt. Shout out to Kurt for editing the video as well as always. And with that said, I'm going to see you guys in the next video. Until then, peace out, guys.